Actually, I met Phil Zuckerman some years ago. Know him through FFRF and through Triangle Free Thought Society, and he's been very kind and generous with his time towards the movement. He is the founding chair of the nation's pioneering first secular studies program at Pitzer College, where he's the associate dean and the professor of sociology at Pitzer College. He's written many, many books, including Living the Secular Life, Society Without God, which I've read and really, really enjoyed. And he's also written the Oxford Handbook of Secularism. His latest book, which I can't wait to read, is What It Means to Be Moral. And as an advocate of the notion that the future of our world depends on secular morality, I'm really looking forward to hearing what Phil has to say today, and I'm sure you are too. Phil.
Man, what a crowd. This is exciting for me. I teach at a small liberal arts college, so this is fantastic. I'm going to take a picture with myself. Show it to my wife and kids. Good to see you. Good to be here. Man, it feels good. Okay, my people, our people. There's the clock. Good. Good morning. So let me start with a couple stories to get things going. As I was preparing for this, I was just trying to think about what I've been experiencing lately, what we've been going through, and a couple. This just kept sticking in my mind like sand in a jar of Vaseline. I just couldn't get it out. So it was, 4 or 5 or 6 months ago. Things were opening up in LA. I live in Los Angeles, which, by the way, it's like 7 in the morning for me, so forgive me if I am a little foggy. My older daughter lives in a nice, hip part of LA. It's called Silver Lake. And restaurants were just opening up, things were opening up, and so my wife and I drove across town to have a dinner with her and her boyfriend at an outdoor patio at a hip, cool place in Silver Lake. And we were so excited, first time out to dinner like this. And we parked, and just as we were parking, I saw a crowd of folks. They had some guitars and some signs, and it just so happened that this restaurant my daughter picked was across the street from a Planned Parenthood down there. Maybe we were in West Hollywood. And these people were organizing a protest. It was early evening, so Planned Parenthood had already closed, but they were out there on the street, and they had all these pro-life signs, and protect babies, and protect life, and love life. And so as we're walking by, there was a leader there, this woman, and she was handing out signs. And of course, they had all these signs saying life, pro-life, Jesus, God, pro-life, and none of them were wearing masks. So, as the woman approached me with a thing, I said, no thanks. I said, you said you're pro-life, why aren't you wearing a mask? I mean, the pandemic was still, things were getting better, but we were all still needing to protect ourselves. And she said, God will protect me. And I looked down, I said, you're wearing shoes. And she said, well, I'm on the city street, I'm like, right? I said, you're wearing glasses. Well, I'm nearsighted or far, right? Yeah. So I'm like, actually, you're wearing clothes. Now she's offended. And I said, and I see you've dyed your hair. I didn't go there, but I wanted to. So I thought, wow, so your God, you have to wear shoes because you don't want to damage your feet. And you got to wear clothes to protect you from the elements. And you're wearing glasses because God won't cure your vision. And yet God will protect you from this pandemic, this bug, this virus. And to me, it spoke volumes. Of course, my kids were like pulling me, come on. Not again, not again. Okay. So I wanted to think of something we're going to come back to that, but I was thinking, how can I contrast this with some of the work I do and the way I think about these issues? And I remembered what happened to a cousin of mine. and his mom, my aunt, Edna. So I have some relatives in Denmark, where I've been fortunate to live a couple years. Many years ago, a cousin who's actually my age, this is a long time ago, when he was 2, started having symptoms, wasn't doing well, wasn't feeling well, wasn't healthy, tests after test after test after test, hospitals, this, that, not a good time, not a fun time. When the test came back that he had childhood leukemia, his mom, my Aunt Edna, was at the hospital, and when the diagnosis came in that, he's got leukemia, he's 3 years old at this point, a young woman shows up at the hospital, enters where my aunt is, and says, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, and this is my name, and I am, so sorry about your son, understand the diagnosis, so I am here for you. I will be your personal secretary. I will be answering any mail you have. I will be paying your bills. I will be taking out your trash. I will be cleaning your house. I will be doing your laundry. I will be doing your grocery shopping, and I am just here for you for anything you need, because you need to focus on your son now who's sick." You know how much this was going to cost to have this person? Free, subsidized by the national health care of Denmark. This woman was a social worker who was paid through taxes to help parents like this in need, so they don't have to deal with job stuff, bills, just so because their kid is having a tough time health-wise. Now, what's interesting about that, by the way, my cousin survived and is alive and well today, doing fine. To me, these two stories kind of illustrate to me the difference here between a kind of theologically based morality, a kind of religious morality, and a secular humanist-based morality, right? In the first one, you have, with religion, a kind of presented moral superiority, first of all, that is actually depraved and harmful. And in the second one, in a kind of secular humanist situation, a very understated, not less touted morality. No one in Denmark is running around saying, "Look how morally superior you are with our universal health care. Look how morally superior we are by paying attention to the dictates of science and empiricism. Look how morally superior we are by taking care of people in need." They don't say that. It's not blasted. And yet, it's actually alleviating suffering, which to me is the goal of any moral system, right? Or legal system. So it's interesting to me how this plays out in our world, especially here in the United States, where the moral high ground is claimed by those that are doing the most damage often. And those of us that work to make the world a better place, work to alleviate suffering, we do so out of humanist values that are not proclaimed as such necessarily, and are certainly not recognized as such by the wider society. And we got to change that. The question is not how can you be moral if you don't believe in God, but how can you be moral if you believe in God? Oh man, easy crowd, easy crowd. I was going to say, I spent all week thinking of, I was going to say, oh, here I am preaching to the converted. And I was like, no, I can't use that. So I've been thinking like, here I am pontificating to the informed and educated. How's that? Is that a good? Okay. So now, one of the things that I try and teach my students, of course, is, I'm a sociologist by training, you can find an anecdote to illustrate anything. Right? Anecdotes are not necessarily, they're fun, they're good, they're illustrative, they're engaging, but, it's not solid data, right? And so I'm always pushing my students, and I'm saying, when you're in a debate with somebody, it's a good idea to present their arguments in the best of light and then show why it's wrong, not find a certain anecdote that's a straw man type situation. So you could think, well, Phil's picked these two anecdotes, but they're not really reflective of what's going on. Not so. We've got the data. We've got the data. On today's burning moral, ethical issues, we've got clear, strong correlations. The more religious you are, you fall on one side of these issues, and the more secular you are, you fall on another. And by the way, just so you know, I'm often told by people, well, Phil, there's a lot of liberal religious people out there who agree with your positions. And I'm like, right, because they have a secularized version of religion. Hello, I know friends, nice Episcopalians and Reformed Jews and blah, and progressive Catholics, and I'm like, right. And on every issue, they don't take things literally. They don't take the Bible literally. Their God is not it's all because they are leaning towards the secular side of things. And of course, that's why we join hands on these issues. But so let me walk us through some of them. I don't want this just to be a rambling list here, but I think it's so important. So when we sit back and think, okay, what are we facing today? At least in the United States, obviously, I so appreciated the earlier presentation to get us to think globally and what's going on in India right now. So I'm speaking now, obviously, U.S. and not as global as I should. So obviously, the pandemic, okay, that's global. Who among us here in the United States is doing the most to alleviate suffering? Who follows the stay-in-place mandates, who wears masks, who gets the vaccine. We've got the data. Atheist Americans are the most likely to get vaccinated in this country. And that's an altruistic act because you're trying to help everyone, not just yourself. Some people say to me, like, isn't it my right if I don't want to get a vaccine and don't want to wear a mask? I'm like, is it your right to drink and drive? Like, give me a break. You're causing suffering. You're causing unwanted victims here. So when it comes just to the basic pandemic, we see our morals are not only just as good as the religious, but better, more active and engaged in helping others and solving others. So I think about the climate crisis, right? Who's more likely to understand the climate crisis and want to take action to alleviate it? The more secular you are, the more you fall on that. I have, just for example, recent PRRI study found that over 80% of secular Americans accept the evidence that human activity is causing climate change, and they place addressing climate change at the top of the list of their political priorities, while only 33% of white evangelicals accept such evidence. And yet it's the white evangelicals that have been running this country for the last, previous 4 years, ran the White House, packed the Supreme Court, packed the lower courts, the appellate courts, the circuit courts. Whew, we got our work cut out for us. Thank goodness there's FFRF. My goodness. I cannot tell you what an honor and the work they do and how many people I refer to them when they're in legal straits. Anyway, women's reproductive rights are under assault right now in our country, right? The women's ability to have autonomy over their own bodies. And again, we see in fact, FFRF did some excellent research on their own membership, and I consider members of FFRF the most committed to the secularist cause out there. And what do we see among supporting women's reproductive rights? 98.8% of active secular voters and FFRF members support women's reproductive rights. Yes, that is the highest rate there. Race and racism, the deep poison, the deep crimes of this nation, right? Where do we stand? It was really interesting. There was a woman, Deborah Hall, I believe at Duke, who wanted to do a study on racism and religion. And she wanted to show how, the more religious care more about racism, are concerned more about racism, particularly she's talking about white Americans here. So she did a meta study. She gathered every legitimate national sample she could find that had a representative sample of folks about correlating religiosity to racism to see where Americans fell. And surprise, surprise, what was her finding? Agnostics, atheists, and secular humanists reported the lowest levels of racism and racist among white Americans, and of all, compared to all other religions, liberal, conservative, fundamentalists, there it was. And we see this time and time again. Which is interesting because both the secular and the religious tell a kind of story about the unity of humanity, right? Every religion claims that this daddy God, we're all this daddy God's children, so we're all brothers and sisters. Secular humanists know a different story. It's that we all come from primates and we all share we're all the same species. One story has data and evidence to support it. The other is a myth. Both with the same, and so what's interesting is where do we fall? Those of us that accept the scientific, evidence-based notion of all being one, we live that out more, we act out that more, and even in our politics reflect that. So that's not to say we don't have a racist problem. It's hard to live in the United States and not internalize that racism, and yet on these measures, the best measures we have, the more secular you are, the less likely you are to express those and act on those. And I'm proud of that. Let me see, I got some data here, actually. Some percentages. Yeah, where was that one? Okay. So, among Americans who believe that racial discrimination is a major problem in the U.S., 76% of all Americans say so, but 96% of active secularist members like you say it as such. And here's this interesting one, supporting reparations for slavery. About 20% of Americans say they are in favor of such. 45% of FFRF members and secularist voters say as much. Still not a majority, but wow, it's up there. Highest rate. Whether it's LGBTQ rights, whether it's animal rights, whether it's wanting to stem gun violence, whether it's caring for the well-being of democracy, whether it's helping refugees fleeing suffering, whether it's supporting death with dignity, on issue after issue after issue that actually relates to how people experience the world and whether or not they're going to suffer or thrive, secular humanists come down on the moral, ethical side, and the more religious folks on the opposite. And this needs to be known, and this needs to be trumpeted, and this needs to be hammered, and this needs to be asserted. So that's the what. So now the question is why? Why does it play out this way? Well, I would argue that the foundations are quite different here. When you accept that there's no magical beings out there, and it's just us on this planet spinning round, you tend to frame your morality or base it on empathy and compassion. Empathy and compassion. For each one of those issues that I've raised, you just go there. Not on obedience to an imaginary and vengeful God. Clearly, that doesn't hold up. We base our worldview on a here and nowness. I'm sure there's a word for that in German that's just perfect, but we don't really have that in English. But we live in the here and now, and all that means, rather than living our lives with, yearning for pie in the sky and the by and by. And that's going to affect decisions we make, plans we make, politicians we support, things we care about. Also, as I've already mentioned, there's a real deep cosmopolitanism, universalism embedded in our worldview. One of the issues that my students ask me, like, oh, what's so bad about religion, Phil? And, that's a good question, and we've got to be able to answer that. But one of them is, in every study we have, the more religious you are, the more tribalistic you are. Religiosity and tribalism, xenophobia, nationalism are highly, highly correlated. Again, that's not to say there aren't some secular humanists out there that are xenophobic and tribalistic and so on and so forth. However, the correlation is robust. That we are actually more cosmopolitan, meaning we see ourselves as citizens of the world much more than the religious, who see themselves much more in terms of their membership to a particular tribe, a particular group, which is conducive towards in-group sympathy and out-group antipathy. And we all have to struggle with that. It's part of our evolutionary past. But somehow, for some reason, the secular folks, we seem to have progressed farther along on that, expanding that circle, as Peter Singer talked about. And finally, another sort of cardinal virtue, I got to think of a secular version of that for us secular folks, is scientific empiricism. We're interested in things like data and evidence and research, and we tend to heed it. We know it's not perfect, we know it's flawed, but we know that it is a method that is self-improving. You know, it's so funny. Again, sorry to always talk to my students, but I got to draw from my world. I often, whenever science comes up, the scientific method, some student always says, "Oh, science, science is terrible. I mean, science has done so many bad things. Science has made so many mistakes. They said this, and then that was wrong, and they said this, and that was wrong." And I said, "Well, you could only prove that that was wrong through better science. How did you know that that was wrong? How did you know that that was harmful? There's only one way to know how many teeth are in a horse's mouth, and that's the count." So we understand this sort of value of the scientific method rather than rely on myths, fantasies, and prayers. And that's not to say that some people in really tough situations need myths, fantasies, and prayers to get through the night. I understand that. But our job, as I see it, is to address the conditions that are producing the suffering, not simply provide myths and fantasies in the wake of that suffering. To me, that's not the way to do it. And we're actually living that in the choices we make, the pursuits we pursue, and the political choices we make. And so that's the good news as far as I'm concerned. And I have a few more minutes left for Q&A. So thank you so much for listening.
Good morning, Phil. My question is resolving around the most shocking discovery that there are a lot of, are you hearing me? That there are a lot of conservative atheists, Republican atheists. We recently lost Dave Silverman to our issues because that's sort of what he is. Tom Sheedy is another one who has a group called Urban Conservative. So those are just examples, but there are others. So what about those conservative atheists?
Yeah, thanks for that. This is one issue where Karl Marx and Ayn Rand, clink their glasses and toast in unison. Both hardcore atheists. And you couldn't have two more opposing political orientations. So this is what I would say. A couple things. Look, coming to the realization and recognition that there are no magical, invisible beings out there that are going to help us or save us, that's where atheism, begins and ends. There's nothing in that realization that prods you towards one political party or another, or one set of values or another, right? It just means you don't believe in God, gods, and so on and so forth. Fairies, imps, and other assorted. Well, I kind of like to think there are trolls out there in Norway, but don't tell anybody at FFRF. But so this is how I handle it. Number one, of course, I'm horrified and disgusted that any fellow secular humanist would support Trump as David Silverman has, and it's just horrific. On the other hand, I look at it positively as a sign of our growth. And what do I mean by that, right? When I was born in 1969, fewer than 5% of Americans said they had no religion. Today, we're up around 30%, maybe even higher. 87 million Americans having no religious affiliation. Are they all atheists and agnostics? No, but many of them are, and the numbers are growing. My new book is on the data on secularization. On every measure you can think of, belief, behavior, belonging, religion is plummeting in this country, especially among the younger generations. So I think it's a function of, look, as our tent grows, we're going to be more diverse, hopefully, racially, ethnically, and so on and so forth, but also politically. And so we have to ask ourselves where our priorities lie, and accept that some of our brothers and sisters are going to. I mean, yeah, it's tough. Robert Price, man, this guy who debunked, who writes about the myth of Jesus and proves that Jesus is a mythological figure, doesn't believe in climate change or climate crisis or global warming. So it's just the way it goes. And humans are a trip, humans are funky, and there's always going to be some of us in that direction. But I will say, I'll just end there by saying I have much more in common and embrace hands with a brother or sister of faith who supports a sane political agenda than an atheist who supports Trump. I'll say that.
Thanks so much for being here. So my biggest cognitive dissonance occurs when I meet people who, in your words, express empathy and compassion, and who have serious track record of doing positive things for their communities, and yet express sincerely held religious beliefs. And I feel reluctant to confront them in fear to offend otherwise nice people. How would you act in a situation like that?
I guess it depends who's paying for lunch. Let's see. Yeah, I've got wonderful, truly loving in-laws who are fantastic grandparents, have supported me and my family through a lot of tragedy, actually. And they are evangelical Christians for Trump, right? And what can you do? I know what you're talking about. There are good, compassionate, empathetic people who are people of faith. What I would say is, look, if it's a personal relationship, perhaps put those issues on the back burner. If it's a professional relationship, you have to figure out who's the boss and who's not. But I would say that if you are going to engage, then you just have to treat others the way you would want to be treated. And that means listen, be polite, be clear, don't be condescending, don't attack, no ad hominem, and do the best you can. And I'm conflicted on this. I've talked, one of the interesting things is to talk to apostates, people who have lost their faith. And I've talked to some who have said, hey, if this colleague hadn't started showing me some stuff and showing me some films and turning me on to books and arguing, I would have never been enlightened this way. I don't like to say lost my faith because that sounds like something bad. I would have never gained enlightenment, right? But others, say it doesn't. You couldn't argue me out of this. I had to come through this journey on my own. And there's a lot of research that shows people who lose their faith tend to do so through the logic of their own minds over a protracted period of 2 to 4 years. So I don't have any magic answer there other than treat people the way you would want to be treated, and that's the best we can do. But politically, we've got to be fierce. Take no prisoners. I mean, at the political level, at the activist level, we've got to do what we can to make this world a better place and to spread reason and rationality, because these things will save us all. Are we done, Dad?
We're done.
Okay.
Oh.
Thank you. I'm out of time. Thanks, Dan.